Today, we are going to talk about eligibility requirements for VA loans. So who is eligible? What kind of service do you need in order to become eligible for a VA loan? What are the time requirements and all that sort of stuff? So first off, let's split it up between active duty and then guard and reserves. Active duty people. When we get into active duty, let's talk about active duty, and then we'll also talk about people that served on active duty and then got out. So first off, when you join active duty, as long as you have served 90 days outside of training in your first unit, that's when you first become eligible for a VA loan. So let's give you an example. You go to basic training, you go to AIT, then you go out to your first unit. Once you've been in that first unit for 90 days, that's when you're initially qualified for a VA loan. If you serve a full commitment, let's say you serve 4 years in the military, or 6 years or 8 years or whatever the number is, as long as you serve at least 2 years and then get out and have 2 years of service on your DD-214, you will be eligible for a VA loan, as long as you have a non-dishonorable discharge. So it can be an honorable discharge, it could be a general discharge. As long as you don't start getting into the bad conduct discharge and things like that, you're going to be just fine for a VA loan. So active duty, again, you got to be in your first unit for 90 days, and if you've left the service, you have to have served at least 2 years total. If you find the information in this video helpful, feel free to like and subscribe. All right, let's keep going. Now let's talk about National Guard and Reserves. National Guard and Reserves are a little bit trickier. If you're in the National Guard and Reserves, you have to have served at least 6 years in the Guard or 6 years in the Reserves, and you have to have gotten the requisite amount of points. So if you missed an annual training and didn't make it up, if you missed a couple of drills, your 1 weekend a month type thing, you may not have collected up enough points within that 6 years to actually be eligible for a VA loan. So we got to make sure that your points match up with the years. The second thing that would make you eligible as a guard or reservist would be if you were called up to active duty at any point during that time for at least 90 days. So let's say you were a reservist in the Illinois National Guard. Reservist in the National Guard, that didn't make sense. But if you were a National Guardsman in the Illinois National Guard, and you got called up to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, and you spent more than 90 days active duty, that is going to make you eligible for a VA loan. Now, one caveat here, National Guard and Reserves, you have to have an honorable discharge in order to be eligible for a VA loan. It can't be a general discharge. It can't be dishonorable. It can't be bad conduct. Any of that stuff, you have to have an honorable discharge. Now, let me give you a couple of other special situations. If you are a surviving spouse of a service member, you do have eligibility. So if your spouse was deceased due to anything that was service connected, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have died in wartime or anything like that. It could be that they had, I've seen people that had Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam, and then they died because of that, and they had a VA disability because of their Agent Orange exposure. They can be eligible for a VA loan, or their spouse can be eligible for a VA loan after the service member has passed away. So surviving spouses can be eligible. One of the other questions I get about eligibility, I have people all the time go, "Hey, my dad served. Can I use his VA loan? He's happy to let me use his VA eligibility." That doesn't work. It's only spouses, surviving spouses. And so kids are not eligible, and the only spouses that are eligible just by themselves would be somebody that has surviving spouse and maybe gets some sort of VA disability from the VA after their spouse has deceased. So, and then there's some other nuance too. There's depending on when you served, there are different time requirements. If you served in the Korean War, if you served in the Vietnam War, all of the different periods of service have some slightly different roles. So the best thing to do is just check in with a loan officer who's super familiar with VA loans, so we can look over your exact situation. We can get with the VA and get your certificate of eligibility. It's really not a hard process at all. So feel free to reach out at any time.